Fosi Audio has generously provided a sample of their new GR-70 headphone valve amplifier for the purpose of this review. To preface this, I don't have much experience with valve amps. A good while ago I owned a Bravo Audio Ocean, a fairly small but powerful hybrid amp. About 2 months ago I reviewed the Fosi Audio GR-40, another similar hybrid DAC amp combo with more features. While they both sounded great, neither of them seemed to offer a big enough difference to solid state for me to allow them into my amplifier rotation. Early this year, I bought a vintage Stax SRM T1, which is the first time I really noticed a difference between solid state and valve amplification, and even the difference between valves when I removed the stock Stax valves and installed some old General Electric valves which seemed to take a bit of an edge off the treble sharpness. Of course, I've also auditioned a bunch of very high-end valve amps like those from Felix Audio, which had an especially strong presence at High-End Munich this year. And while I can say they sounded good, I've never been able to compare them side by side with my own equipment in a more controlled environment, so I can't add that to the discussion. This time, however, the GR-70 with its pure 4-valve amplification definitely seems to be doing something a bit different. The GR-70 has all the usual hallmarks of a good Fosi Audio product with a solid CNC machined aluminium alloy body and control knobs, a mechanical switch for toggling between higher and lower impedance modes, and of course the treble and bass tone controls being reversed. It almost wouldn't feel like a Fosi Audio product if they were the right way around. The tone controls themselves have the usual high quality feeling of some resistance when turned, which is better for fine control. The rear 2 valves on this amp are an unusual pick, in this case the RCA 6AC7 VT112s, which have metal housings that are more resistant to light physical bumps than their glass counterparts. Indeed, they are military spec and were used prolifically during World War II by the USA. And I say unusual because I can barely seem to find another example of a headphone amplifier that uses these. They certainly are not a common choice. The 2 front valves are the much more common General Electric 5654Ws, and the amp has acrylic tubes to protect their glass housings. As noted on the Fosi Audio website, the valves used on the GR-70 are vintage, so they might have signs of aging or wear and variation in print style depending on their production badge. Also, that valves are shipped at random, so I'm curious if there are any other GR-70 owners. Please let me know if your valves are significantly different to mine. On the user-facing side, there is a giant volume control knob on top that also turns it on. It has very little resistance, which is fine for its size, and then you only need to wait around 10 seconds for the valves to warm up before it will play audio. On the front you have the impedance selector switch, 6.3mm and 3.5mm stereo sockets, and finally treble and bass tone correction knobs. On the rear you have the power input and 2 sets of RCA sockets, 1 input and 1 output, allowing you to use the GR-70 as a preamp, which fully utilizes the valves and tone controls to add flavor to your loudspeaker system. Unfortunately, when turned off, there is no passive pass-through, which renders it a little less versatile. With that out of the way, we now get to the interesting part. I wasn't immediately convinced that what I was hearing out of this amplifier was not already using some tone correction. However, I have been assured by Fosi Audio that while there is no tone defeat function, meaning the audio signal always passes through the tone circuitry, while the tone controls are at their 0 settings, there is no tone correction applied, and any audible differences are thanks entirely to the valves. I've heard more than a couple of valve amps at this point, and I'm quite sure that what they add or change in the sound could not usually be measured to this extent. The following graphs were taken with the headphone in the same seating on the mini DSP ears, in the same sitting in quick succession, switching between the Fosi Audio GR-70 and Fosi Audio SK01 amp, a solid-state amp that I have compared to quite a few other of my regular solid-state amps and confirmed to be just as neutral as the others. Firstly, looking at the Hi-Fi Man HE500, there is a clear rise in the sub-bass. The Fosi Audio i5 exhibits a similar rise in the sub-bass. The JVC HAD1000 is the same, as is the JVC HADX1000. Finally, the Sennheiser HD650 confirms it beyond any doubt. Different headphones with different driver tech, design, and driver sensitivities all confirmed a consistent 1 to 2 decibel rise in the bass that rolls off around 100 Hz. I don't know about the electronics involved in amplifier design, but I've heard enough amps to know that this feels different. This reminds me of the time I reviewed the Murph 1 headphone, which was incredibly smooth, dark, and relaxing on my solid-state amps. Then, when I heard it at Munich this year through the Felix Audio Elise, I was gobsmacked to hear them sounding brighter, more lively, and energetic. So there are even valve amps that do things very differently. I wonder if this could well just be an unusually strong effect from the RCA 6AC7s. Anyhow, I decided to run my JVC HAD1000 at all EQ extremes and also with a touch less bass to see if I could emulate the natural bass rise of the stock GR-70, and the results were about what I expected. Turning down the bass knob a little will make the headphone measure almost the same as out of the GR-70 as the SK01. So, for some of you, that might be excellent news, as you might only want the valves for their other sound properties. Tone differences aside, the GR-70 actually sounds fabulous. The dual valve amplification does actually increase the sense of staging width and scale in music noticeably more than the SK01 or indeed any of my solid-state amps. When I say it's noticeable, yes, those who actually care about 1 to 5% differences may nod in agreement, but the average person wouldn't give a French toast about it one way or the other, so let's try and keep some perspective. That said, if like me you do care for and greatly appreciate those differences, the GR-70 is an absolute breath of fresh air, especially for someone who's been stuck in neutral hell for years. The GR-70 colors the sub-bass and adds a touch of drama. It just sounds kind of slick. For some balance, I actually didn't like the way they sounded with the Fosi Audio i5. I thought the GR-70 smoothed it out in a weird way. I wasn't convinced by its performance either with the Hi-Fi Man HE500. I think my large planars still benefit the most from my more powerful solid-state Audio GD NFB 11.28 DAC amp. But that's not a rule either, as I've heard large planars sound agile on multiple kilobuck valve amps too. On the other hand, vintage planars don't seem to get affected quite as much, but neither was I super impressed with the synergy either. Going back to dynamics, the Sennheiser HD650 was just a smoother, richer experience, but almost too smooth. It sounds fine, but I could take it or leave it. Two big aha moments for me were the Sony MDR SA3000 and the JVC HADX1000. Both of them sensitive, dynamic, Japanese, vividly colored, high-end dynamic headphones. The SA3000 not only benefits from the valve amplification, smoothing things out a bit, but the tone controls let me boost the bass and tame the spicy treble perfectly. These were finally starting to sound like something I could live with permanently, something I was not able to achieve previously with solid-state amps. Next was the JVC HADX1000. It sounds almost as if it was made for pairing with amps just like this. Suddenly, the glare in the upper mid-range was calmer. Bass now has more depth and control, and treble is smoother. The GR-70 seems to bring out all its best traits while smoothing out the flaws. Two final footnotes I'd like to quickly add are that while adjusting the high and low Z switch, or plugging in and out headphones, or even just tapping the housing, some light vibration from the valves can be heard through the headphone, although the effect is much stronger through IEMs. And finally, flathead earbuds and in-ear monitors sound wonderful through the GR-70. Both, with their tiny drivers, very often have parts of their upper mid-range or treble that are too forward, something that the GR-70 either smooths out naturally or something that can be smoothed out further with tone control. Obviously, some of the differences brought forth by such an amplifier with such a relatively strong personality are objectively very small, but to me they are big and change the way I can enjoy music with certain headphones, just how adding a pinch of salt can transform an entire meal. I'm more than happy to recommend this amplifier because, for one thing, you have the option to reduce the bass manually, bringing them closer to true neutral, thereby allowing you to enjoy the more nuanced traits of valve amplification, but also because the slight addition of a bit of dirty bass is nothing if tasteful, and even if it is a cheeky tuning decision from Fosi Audio, I kind of respect the hustle. At the end of the day, nobody buys a valve amp for the purest acoustic fidelity. They expect a performance, and the GR-70 is giving a great one. It offers a smooth, wide, lush sound, and is now a permanent resident on my desk. That's it for now. Take it easy, and I'll see you in the next one.